And with that, I'd like to hand you over to our next moderator, my colleague Adam Bryant, who will talk about climate action and carbon pricing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as you're coming up, just introductions: Pascal Canfin, the CEO of the Worldwide Fund for Nature; Eldar Sætre, CEO of Statoil; and Nigel Topping, the CEO of We Mean Business. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Let's jump right in and start big picture. We know what the big goal is. We know the targets that we have to hit to stave off the worst effects of climate change. The question is, how do we get there? What is the roadmap? So let's start with that. What do you see that path being?
Well, just to make sure everybody is aware that I'm CEO of W.W.F France.
Yes.
I don't want to compete with the
Yes.
other CEOs in the network. So I would like to come back maybe to one figure just pointed out by Fatih, because it's a very important one, and he said it en passant. For the first time last year, we have now more capacity installed in renewable energies than in coal. I mean, it was something which was definitely not seen as possible, let's say, a decade ago, maybe 5 years ago. And it is directly connected to a couple of things that were already discussed. The drop in cost for all renewable energies, much more dramatic than expected. And the fact that in China, half of the coal market worldwide, the coal peak has already taken place. It was foreseen by the government plan in 2020, and it definitely happened in 2014, 6 years before. So it's very important because I like EIA report, like all of us, but we, as WWF, we made a document we published for the G20 summit in September, a couple of weeks ago. And we took a look back to the previous EIA report. And we say, well, what was the EIA saying on renewable growth in 1990, in 20, in 25, in 2010? Each time, each report, it was way under what really happened. We are at the situation that was foreseen by the EIA in the 2030s, in 1990s. So you can imagine that we are, because I think Fatih is a bit, my view is that he is a bit conservative to the analysis of what is happening. Because the expectations are always beaten by renewable energy. So that's why this figure, that we have now more renewable energy installed than coal, and the sense of history is very clear on that, is a figure that all decision makers, whether they are private or public, should have in mind.
And so you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic because first, as Fatih said, by the way, it's not only about climate change. It's not only about climate change. In China, what is happening, and I think tomorrow in India, you know, the most polluted cities in the world, it's not in China anymore. It's in India now and Pakistan.
Right.
So what happened in Delhi is that you start having urban middle class saying, well, I don't want my kids breathing this air.
Right.
And so I'm optimistic because I see three things moving. The first is technologies. The second is policy. And the third is the value system. And what changed societies is also, and maybe mainly in democratic societies at least, the value system. And if you add the three things together, the three trends, we could meet this challenge.
Right, okay. Pascal mentioned India. Nigel, you were recently there, yes? Tell us what you saw down there and how has that affected your thinking about our pathway?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I don't know if RJ from Terry is speaking, I think, later, but he told, I've kind of been, it's been the received wisdom for me for a long time that, you know, India just hasn't got enough power and needs more power at any price. So the question of, and it's got its own coal resource, it's going to build coal. And then to the electric vehicles point, and recently we heard 3 Indian ministers, including the Minister for Energy, talking about going 100% electric vehicles by 2030. If you've got a shortage of power, why are you trying to rush? Well, it turns out that actually in many, and there's a development challenge of the 250 million that Fatih mentioned, but in terms of having enough power on grid, once that's solved, then you actually end up, of course, you have too much power, so you're looking for another of that state investment, so you're looking for new sources. So it's amazing how things can flip. The air pollution point, but also the point that as you bring power on board, if you've got excess, then actually more electric vehicles help you with the intermittent renewables. Right. The other thing that's I think there's lots of lessons from India about actually some sectors in India being world leading. I was just with the CEO of Dalmia Cement, who've a cement company. They've committed to 100% of their electricity coming from renewable powers, and they're the most energy efficient and carbon efficient cement manufacturer in the world. So, sitting here in Europe, the assumption often is that the leading companies in dirty sectors are European. That's not always the case. So sometimes, because of the air pollution and because of the premium on power availability, the drives on energy efficiency have often been greater in countries like India.
Right. And let's pan back from India to the global challenge. What is your prescription? What is your view of the pathway to reaching the goals?
I think everyone knows we have to decarbonize power as quickly as possible. Then we have to electrify other areas. I also think, Fatih's maths are really interesting. I think we get the exponential maths wrong all the time. Right, okay, so we're only at 1% now. So that allows people to say, oh, it'll be 2040, 2050, 2060 before we have 100% electric vehicles. If you're at 1% and you grow market share by 60% a year, you're at 100% in 10 years. And that's the revolution that's happening now. You have BNEF talking to the crossover point of range and cost in 2022. Right. Why would anyone buy a polluting, noisy, dirty, can only recharge it at a petrol station car when it's cheaper and you've got a better range and you can charge it at home? And that's going to happen within 5 or 6 years. Right. So I think we've got to get the exponential maths right on the way up and on the way down. Someone was talking, Keith was talking about, the cost reduction is getting less and less. It's a Moore's law. It gets less and less in absolute terms, but not in percentage terms, of course. Right. You can't take €5 out of a €2 price, right? But you can still take 40% out a year. Right. So I think we've got to get the exponential maths right. Crucially on decarbonising power, part of my work with the Energy Transitions Commission will be publishing later in the year, realising that there's a lot of myths still about the inability to incorporate very high levels of intermittent renewables into modern grids. Right. We know actually with existing technology, with the right level of interconnectors, demand management and storage, we can handle near complete renewables in modern grids. We already have some examples where that's happening in Northern Europe. So I think those two in terms of power and energy. Then, of course, there's all the land-based stuff as well, which is maybe a subject for another conference. Right.
And you'll do a tutorial in the break on the new math of climate change and percentage.
It's just exponentials, right? The old thing about if the lilies double their coverage in a pond, the day before they're 100%, how much coverage is there? And 3 days before they're only at 10%, and then boom. Right. So I think people it'd be worth bringing out your old maths textbooks and revising. It's just simple for everyone. If you're at 1% market share now, feels like 100% is forever away. But if market share is growing at 60% a year, this is what happens with technology adoption curves, with S-curves, right? Then you'll be at 100% in 10 years. So by 2030, you'll be having internal combustion engine rallies with people in check shirts and beards who go to steam engine rallies today. Right, because it's exponential, and once you hit that point, why will people buy them except for kind of a quaint, nostalgic sense of the quaint old technology that I grew up with?
Right, it's the same way kids look at phones with wires on the wall, and they say, "What's that?"
Right, and we're like, "Well, that was normal when I was a kid." A dial-up phone.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of embarrassingly old. Yeah. So a 15-year-old would look like that, like it's something from pre-war, when in fact it was when we were kids. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So let's turn to Eldar. Give us a report from the front lines. What is your company doing to help with the transition?
Well, we are oil and gas producer, right? So we are right in the middle of the
yes.
So I think for us, this is really starts with a recognition, fundamental recognition, that the climate is changing, and Paris is extremely important, and there is too little being done actually to support it. Mm-hmm. That is starting point, and then we have to take, and I try to take, from my perspective, a leadership perspective to this, which is basically, I don't want to, there will be a tremendous transition, and it's going on, and we'll have to move faster related to energy, and I could stand by and watch it. I don't want to watch it. I want to take part in it. Right. So I want to shape the future of energy and not being shaped, to put it that way, and not sit and wait.
Right.
And also translate what we see and the changes that is necessary must happen, turn that from potentially being looked upon as a threat into business opportunities.
Right.
So what are we doing? Give me a few words on that. First of all, we are producing oil and gas, and the world is going to need it. So it's extremely important how we do that. The carbon efficiency of producing oil and gas, and take the full responsibility in doing that. So raised our ambitions and pretty high impact ambitions on that front. Then it's the usage of oil and gas, how we can reduce the impact and the climate impact from the usage. And then you're into CCS and so on, I think, and usage of CO2 and combining natural gas and not least displacing coal by natural gas in that role that coal is playing today. So I think that is extremely important. And the last one is about renewables. So really developing our renewables business increasingly and based on the same sort of industrial approach that we use within oil and gas.
And share with the audience about your floating wind farms, because that's a big innovation.
Well, yeah, that's I think that's we are first of all we are pretty big and aggressive on wind farm that is fixed to the seabed, but we are now in starting to construct the world's first floating wind farm in Scotland, and that's exciting because I think it has a big potential. It is you can use it in other environments, other water depths.
Right.
And that opens up new opportunities. It's more flexible. There is less steel, so I think the cost potential is bigger than we see within the fixed seabed, and it's also more dynamic. It's the best. We have one windmill like that, and it's the best performing windmill in our park actually. So you can capture more wind. You can position it in places with better wind conditions. So I really think that is, and we're also combining the Scottish development now with batteries. So that's also an exciting part of the future development of intermittent, production.
Right. And can you explain in 20 seconds how you keep these turbines from falling?
No, I can't. That's the patent. That's the secret. But this is about how the control system. Actually, you move them, and they are flexible, so they are can stand tougher weather conditions, right? Because they're more flexible, and you can move them, and you move the blades, and in more flexible ways.
And not all the oil companies around the world are on the same page about their view of climate change and the degree to which it's a threat and how it has to be addressed. Why is that?
I'll not talk about on behalf of others. I think all major oil and gas companies are addressing this. They have different responses and different ways of talking about it. But if I look at sort of the underlying behavior, they're all changing their business models gradually and addressing these issues.
Right.
Whereas they have different models, different legacy positions, histories, different portfolios. So that explains some of the diversity. There are diversity within the US companies and within the European companies. So it's moving forward. And we have joined an effort now, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiatives, where 10 companies will talk about that tomorrow, actually, in London.
Right.
Do our report and status report, and I think that's an exciting way of actually moving an industry forward. We don't agree on everything, but we agree to move forward, combined as an industry. I think that's very exciting and important.
Right. And what about carbon pricing? It's such a big issue. I'd just like to get your quick takes on what needs to be done, what's the best plan?
Well, when we talk about carbon pricing, we should keep in mind that there are two ways to give a price on carbon. The first one is the explicit one, the big fat tax by Angel Gurria, or the market. So you have an explicit price on the market, but you have also the implicit price manner. And what is working well today in China on coal, or in the US on coal as well, is implicit price. Implicit price is the very old school standard way. If you put a standard on coal, in economic terms, it gives a price as an outcome or an output. And it's more or less the same. Politically speaking, it might be easier to put a standard than a price. And it's exactly why the US and China put a standard and not a price. So I think the global discussion on carbon pricing should have this broad picture, this broad view, not only focusing on explicit price and not only focusing on explicit price on market, and even not focusing on a single global carbon price on a single global market, which will probably never be alive, because there are so many differences politically, economically, in terms of development between China, the US, and EU, to take at least these three, that having a global integrated carbon market delivering just a single global price, I think is not, first is out of reach, and I wouldn't say that it is something we should be after.
Okay.
We should be after some regional devices, both explicit price and implicit prices. And then we should also make a big difference between, in terms of the energy sector, between power generation and the oil use. As it was said before, the oil use is mainly in transportation and not in terms of power generation. So we have two different markets, two different technologies, and so on. And clearly today, there is, for me, the future of energy, because the theme of the conference could be summed up in three words starting with a D. So decarbonize, decentralized, digitalized. And you have with the three Ds the roadmap for an energy future which is compatible with the 2 degrees target. And my ask and our ask from WWF and other civil society representatives to the oil and gas company is exactly is the following. Well, please, you now mainly acknowledge, as you said, the climate risk and the climate change, what is happening in the world. But you don't have still a plan to be aligned with the 2 degrees. So, to my view, to my knowledge, the very first oil company having this commitment to say, well, my own energy mix will be aligned with the 2 degrees target is Total. Total took this commitment in February in London before the investors community, and is starting to deliver. So that's a huge step forward, saying, okay, my own energy mix will be aligned with the 2 degrees. The limitation to that, from our perspective, is that they stick to the 2030 targets. So if we want to be consistent with climate change issues and the Paris Agreement, we need to think about the energy mix in 2050 to get to the carbon neutral world, which is exactly the main added value and the narrative and the storytelling of the Paris Agreement, a carbon neutral world in the next half of this century. So Total made a very important first step. Still has to make the second one, but that would be great to have the other companies from the oil and gas sector having this common narrative, saying, I want my own energy mix compatible with the 2 degree scenario.
That's great. I want to go to Eldar. A couple more comments from the panel, but we are going to have some time for a couple of questions, so be thinking about what you'd like to ask. Eldar, what is your take on carbon pricing?
Well, to me, this is the single most important measure, actually, and there's nothing more forceful than actually the market forces when they really start working. And I think fundamentally we need, the market signals through a carbon price, and I see the complexity of it. No, I'm not naive on that. But I think, the world has to move. And if the world decides, I think we can do a lot. And today, around 40 countries and an additional 20, states and cities is doing such schemes. In Norway, we have done that since 1991. It works. I can tell you it works.
Yeah.
And so I fundamentally think that is the single most important factor in, to take out coal, for instance, to the energy mix. Then it comes to your, if I may allow, your challenge in a way. The world has to move in the right direction when it comes to energy mix. That doesn't necessarily mean that every company that produces energy needs to reflect the world's energy mix. This is much more complex than actually doing the energy mix. We have to do oil and gas production in this, because there is going to be produced oil and gas, and we have to do, a great job in producing oil and gas in the lowest carbon way. We have increased our ambitions now on the Norwegian continental shelf. That ambition alone is enough to take out the whole car park on the Norwegian roads. So it's really impact by doing that. And then on top of that, I agree, we have to sort of move forward. How we use our product is also impactful, through CCS, part of this. still, you produce oil and gas, and then it's what we do beyond oil and gas. So gradually, we'll change our portfolio in that direction, but it's much more than sort of the composition of the portfolio that is supporting the global direction that we all need to support.
Great. Nigel, your quick take. Carbon
Yeah, I think we know that carbon pricing is a really important instrument, particularly in the power sector and heavy emitting sectors. So it will drive the switch from coal to gas. $50 a ton on carbon doubles the cost of coal-fired electricity, so it's game over, right? But of course, as Mr. Royal says, you can also just decide to ban coal, or you can put so there are other policy measures which have the same effect. So if you say you're going to stop burning coal, that's an infinite price, so that's pretty easy for the markets to interpret. But there are other sectors where it's not effective because behavioral economics kicks in. $50 a ton on a price of $50 a ton on carbon only adds $100 a year to the running cost of an average mid-sized car. Right. That's an irrelevant economic signal. So that has to be dealt with through standards, through fuel efficiency standards or electric vehicle standards. And the thing that surprises me is that we often forget that oil price is really important as well. So if you look at some of the legal challenges to Exxon now and some of the lack of disclosure from some oil companies about what assumptions they make on oil prices in valuing their company, which is pretty important for investors. So if oil price assumptions are at $90, $100 in 2030, right, and we're at least discussing the possibility of a peak in demand, which would mean low forever, then those valuations have a risk of being wildly over-optimistic. Right. So actually, we should remember that oil price assumptions are more important in many sectors and in many parts of the economy than carbon price assumptions.
That's great. Time for a couple of questions. Need more coffee? Yes, ma'am. Can we get the microphone? And again, if we can keep your question short, and then we can get time for a couple more. There's a hand here.
Hi, hello. My name is Paola. I'm from CIENSPO. I'm a student of international energy, and I would like to know what are your thoughts or how you could regard gas as a transitional fuel. What do you think about it?
Gas is a transition fuel.
So gas has a very important role to play, and it can play exactly the role that coal plays today. And there is so much natural gas in the world, and it has an immediate impact if the world decides to do that. Now, I agree, this is partly, it's not, in terms of carbon pricing, that could be a component of it, but I also believe it's not enough. So I think direct regulation is one or the other. We see it works, in the US and so on, 12% reductions over the last few years. We see it works in the UK now, where 50% of power production comes from natural gas. It was more coal. So I think a combination of regulations and effective carbon pricing is going to, bring natural gas into the generation. And then, for the longer term, I think CCS is very important. And we're going to be stuck with oil and gas and hydrocarbons for a long, long time, and we can't ignore that fact. And to sort of, to reduce the impact of that, I think the world has to really step up the ambitions on carbon capture and storage and usage.
Yeah, there's a long way to go on that. Any other questions? In the back.
Hello, I'm Grégoire. I'm a student in energy economics in Paris. My question is for Pascal Canfin. You talk about implicit pricing for carbon. Can you be more explicit about it?
Well, when you put a standard on buildings, for instance, to have a certain level of consumption, then indirectly you transfer to an economic cost, so a price on the CO2 emission. So you don't deliver, as a policy, you don't deliver an explicit price, but you deliver an implicit price on carbon. And studies shown that if you move from regulation on refurbishing, for instance, to carbon pricing, you would need a carbon pricing exceeding $500 or euros, I can't remember, I think it was euros, per ton of CO2. I mean, it's just out of space. So you can see how powerful standards might be. And you have also the fact that the political sensitiveness of carbon pricing might be easier when you put just a standard and you say, well, in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, you will have to comply with the standard. And then it's also a driver force for innovation. Because if we took today, and I think it's something we could maybe reflect on, I think if we took the best available technologies and saying, okay, in 5 years' time, the minimum requirement to access the markets will be this in almost every sector, then you would have a huge incentive for green R&D, for innovation, and then you will accelerate. And that's exactly the kind of design in order to have both technology-driven process, so market-driven process, but also policy-driven process. And we need both, otherwise we will fail.
Okay. We have 30 seconds left. I'm going to ask you each a very quick question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is very optimistic, 0 pessimistic. How optimistic are each of you that we're going to meet the goals of the Paris
Which
Agreement?
goal? 1.5, 2 degrees?
2 degrees.
The two
2 degrees. Keeping under 2 degrees. Quick answer.
8.
8.
Okay, I have to be more optimistic.
12.
9. And the reason is because of the ratchet mechanism and the fact that the private sector is leading, cities are leading, states and regions are leading in setting their own goals which are compliant with Paris. 200 businesses have set science-based targets. 140 regions have committed to under 2 MOU. Only 5 countries, representing 0.02% of gross world product, have NDCs which are compliant with Paris.
Okay.
So all those other non-state actors, the action agenda which Minister Royal talked about, are leading the way and will give the confidence through their commitments and their action in the next round of NDCs for governments to step up so that in 2020 we have a set of NDCs which actually do add up to a sub-2 degree path.
So your number is?
10.
10. All right. On that optimistic note, I'm going to turn over to Liz and Carlos Ghosn. Gentlemen, we're going to exit stage right, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Eldar. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that, Adam. And very excited, please take a seat, to have Carlos Ghosn with us today. Whenever you have Carlos Ghosn on a stage,